My father was the administrator of a rich and powerful cattle rancher in the region, owner of large land extensions and the destinies of many peons and helpers who worked on their ranches. In the year 85, the cattle rancher bought a ranch whose lands were close to the slopes of Cerro de la Pitaya, in Panuco, Veracruz. He had acquired it for cattle fattening and due to the richness of the pasture and the water eyes of the area. For that reason, my father and I gave ourselves to the arduous task of bringing freshly harvested beets from the other ranches to said place. I was a helper to my father and learned the handling and administration of the cattle, so that I always accompanied him on all the routes. He was very young, but he had a lot of wool to help. Along with the ranch there were people who worked for a long time on it, and some of those people preferred to be liquidated and go to other lands. However, there was a cowboy who worked as a caretaker with the previous owners, Pancho, and asked my father to continue working for the new owner. My father, as he was a fair man and needed people to work, who knew the ranch and the lands, accepted the cowboy's proposal. The cattle cart work was quite arduous and one day was more than other days, so we did it at night. As it was late, my father decided that we would stay to sleep in the galleys, in which we had tents equipped with a pavilion against mosquitoes and what was necessary to spend the night in that place. We met around a campfire while we ate some vaqueros, my dad and I. At night we talked about the activities of the ranch. Suddenly something caught my attention. It was an amorphous fire that went and came through the pasture and illuminated the treetops. There were several of these eggs that gathered and flew all over the pastoral. My first reaction was to run and hide, but my father looked at me with a severe look and, squeezing my arm, he said, "Don't be scared, bastard. Those are witches. They won't hurt us and we won't pay attention to them." All of that surpassed me. Despite the stories told by my grandfather and my father, I was still nervous about seeing that kind of strange things. I withdrew from the place, while my father and the others stayed a while talking. Still terrified, my naive mind made me go down the pavilion and cover the entire bed, accommodating it under the mattress. I thought that maybe if the fireballs attacked us, they would do nothing to me. My father came and saw what he was doing, and with a joke he said to me, "Bastard, do you really think the pavilion will protect you if the witches want to hurt you? Although you are well hidden, they will go for you. Never show fear." I tried to sleep, but I still thought of those strange appearances. I knew about those legends from my father, but I had never seen one up close. It was quite disturbing. The morning came and we were ready to have breakfast to continue with the day. During breakfast, the topic of conversation was the witches and the way they turned into fire. While I was giving a swerve to my black coffee, I listened carefully to the stories of my father, which in addition to giving me fear, seemed fascinating to him. As time went by, I got used to seeing those appearances during the night, but I still had that disquiet inside. The legends about the practices of those appearances turned out to be scathing and real. I began to realize what the cowboys were telling about the chosen people. Stories about women to which children or babies of months or weeks suddenly died, especially a couple who lived near the hill. The cowboys said that every time they had a baby, he died a few weeks later. They had already had 3 children, and they only had a couple of children, one of 6 and a girl of 7, who had peculiar scars on their bodies. People said that the witches had wanted to kill them by sucking their blood. All of that seemed incredible, but terrifying. But I never imagined what would happen next. Weeks later, we arrived at the ranch with cowboys from one of the ranches that the boss had in Tamaulipas. We needed people in the calf castration, which were too many. So my dad decided to invite cowboys from neighboring ranches to help us. Several of them told us that if we did not have knowledge that Pancho, the cowboy who had stayed to work with my father, was a witch. Fear and uncertainty were invading me every time they told me that Pancho had the ability to turn into an animal and surround me with neighbors. Also those who came from Aldama. My father was not moved by those things. He was a rather braggart man, and of a special character, who always kept him firm in any situation. One day, the neighbor cowboys did not arrive at the day. We were surprised, since they were paid and given the cattle of the cattle to eat them. We continued with the work, and during the morning some men arrived at the ranch. They were herdsmen and the town's police, who were on the edge of the land. One of them, with an inexpressive and serious face, asked to speak to the officer. My father, upon hearing, stood in front of those men and asked the reason for the visit. What followed was quite strange. "Good morning, boss. Well, look, we came to ask for your help or plan for the cowboy Pancho to run," said the town commissioner with great seriousness. "Oh, my God, for what reason?" my father asked, wondering. "Look, I'll be frank. We asked him, we don't demand him to run, because at night he becomes an animal and is getting into the jackals to annoy the children and harass our women," said the police officer in a rather annoying and arrogant tone. Hearing that statement, I could not help laughing, which caused the anger of all those present who saw me with courage. My father saw me with severe eyes and told me to shut up. "I can't run, he is responsible and worker with the ranch," my father determined. "Look, boss, if you don't believe us, we'll wait for you tonight in the ejido, and we will show him what that cowboy is capable of. See it with your own eyes," the impatient police officer said. While my father looked at him with a wry look, the men rode on their horses and moved away. My father was left with a huge doubt and decided to go to the town at night, without Pancho finding out. We waited for the afternoon to fall and headed to the hunting ground where the cowboy was hiding. I was still thinking about all that, and I had doubts more than fear. That's why I decided to stay and accompany my dad, without knowing that that decision would mark my life and my understanding of supernatural things. We arrived at the ranch where there were several men, all of them armed, with rods made of bejuco, pieces of black hose for irrigation and the quartz for horses. We went to a jackal made of adobe and sheet metal roof that was far from the hunting ground. It seemed abandoned. We entered and what we saw surprised us. There were many strange things, skeletons and animal skulls, dirty clothes in a corner, herbs of all kinds and pieces of skin, seemingly pig, watered around a boiling pot. All that was impressive. One of the men closed the door and it became dark. It was hot inside. Another one turned on an oil lamp that was on the table, while another one took off some bars that covered a hole in the wall and loaded a piece of sheet with which he would cover the hole once the supposed beast entered. The hours passed and all of us inside the jackal were sweating profusely, looking at each other and in total silence. My dad was sleeping and I had the nerves at the tip. That place suddenly became huge to me. The game of sinister shadows reflected on the wall by the dim light of the lamp gave the environment an even more terrifying appearance. Silence was uncomfortable, and heat was even more. Suddenly, the nerves of all of us became alert when they heard the clanging of branches outside. Something was approaching the jackal. Everyone took positions, and the man on the sheet settled on top of the hole in the wall, to cover when anything entered through that hole. Another of the men attenuated the light, and barely could be seen. My eyes got used to the darkness, and when I turned to see my dad, something enters through the hole, and the man on the sheet lets it fall, putting his feet on it. The following were frenetic blows and insults to something that was in the middle of the room. It was an animal of humanoid appearance, with feline features, brown skin and long ears, yellow eyes and a pair of fangs that protruded from its lips. That beast began to complain of the pain caused by the blows of the sticks, the hoses and the rooms of those men. I was in a closed and painful way. My ears were covered so as not to hear the screams. I tightly held my father's hand, which, clasped with me on one of the walls of the jackal, I was seeing how they massacred that beast. At some point, the man on the sheet loses his balance and falls on himself. In that instant, the beast realizes and manages to escape, and this does so quickly, and then total silence. They turned on the kinkies and the lamps they brought. They all had a look and smiled with a morbid gesture of satisfaction, as if they had enjoyed the beating they had given to that defenseless animal. On the floor there were traces of skin and blood. The police officer approached my dad and saw him with firmness. "Did you see, boss? It is true what we told him." My dad told him in a tone of pride, "I only saw that they ran over an animal and I did not see more." "Look, boss, if you still do not believe, go to the dawn to Pancho's house. And give that account a good time, that if it does not occur we will do our thing and we will punish him. There you know, we all withdraw from their place and we return to the ranch." In the morning we went to Pancho's jackal. When we arrived, we shouted for the cowboy and his wife came out, who had a sad face. "Excuse me, boss, Pancho says he can't go to work today," the lady told my father. "I come to talk to him." We got out of the truck and went to his house. What we saw was a quite disturbing picture. Pancho was lying on the bed, a bloody sheet covering the cowboy's waist and crotch. The man was completely beaten, with his eyes red, his body covered in blood. His legs were wounded and his bones were exposed, just like his collarbone, which was peeking through his skin, and he complained of immense pain. Pancho's suffering filled me with sadness and doubts. Since the cowboy was our employee, my father contacted the boss to get medical attention. The painful task of taking him to the truck's trunk was exhausting. The man was screaming with pain from the fractures and blows. We transferred him to the Social Security in Panuco. My father argued that the wounds had been made by falling from a horse, version that Pancho himself confirmed and received attention. Sometime after the cowboy recovered, he was fired by the owner of the ranch, and we never heard from him again. Until sometime later, the rumor spread that the old Pancho married that region, becoming Nahual. Truth or lie, I leave it to your discretion.